Culture Pulse is back with another insightful conversation, and this week I'm joined by Gerli Jõgi.
It's the people that have impacted my understanding and my values and apprehensions. Trust is the basis of all relationships, really.
Also, as HR leaders, kind of managing different cultures, you also keep learning every day. Culture Pulse is back with another insightful conversation, and this week I'm joined by Gerli Jõgi, a seasoned HR leader with deep expertise in managing distributed teams and fostering workplace culture across borders. With a career that spans diverse industries and international teams, Gerli brings a unique perspective to leadership, people management, and the opportunities and challenges of distributed work in general. So in this episode, we'll explore her journey in HR, her hands-on experience building trust and clarity in remote teams, and her strategies for aligning leadership principles with global team dynamics. This is going to be such an interesting discussion. So let's get started. I'm so happy to have you. How are you feeling today? Are you ready to roll?
I'm ready to roll, and thank you for this introduction, and thank you for inviting me to your podcast.
Of course, the pleasure is mine. Super excited to have that conversation because I think it's so relevant, especially over the last couple of years. It's just a topic that keeps coming up all the time. So I think it's just going to be so interesting for many of the listeners to hear your perspective. But before we dive into that part, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and kind of like what inspired you to get into HR and pursue this career?
I've been in HR for about 20 years now, I think. And I think that even before university, I kind of knew that something like this would be my field. I went to university and studied something called andragogy, which is the science of adult learning and continuous learning. Just like pedagogy is the science of learning of children, then andragogy is the science of learning for adults. When I studied it, I knew pretty much that I would end up in this corporate world, perhaps supporting learning and development, and that's how I started after university. I went to work for Estonia's biggest chocolate manufacturer, chocolate and sweets and food products manufacturer, and was head of learning and development. Got to do a lot of things in sales and service. So at the time, the company built up their kind of new sales team, so I got to hang out with them a lot. Then I went on to fashion retailing, and it was quite a broad sense of learning and development. I got to hire interns, and I got to be in charge of their portfolios and got to decide which brand they should go to. And so I even got my foot stuck in the fashion world. So that was quite interesting as well. That company was global in 7 markets in Central and Eastern Europe. And I worked a lot with shop managers, shop assistants based on sales KPIs. And at that time, did not have much knowledge about retailing. So that was one of my jobs, to kind of introduce the retailing knowledge to the company. And did lots of company-wide trainings about fashion retailing. And from there, I went to public service. I kind of discovered that I wanted a bigger goal in my career, and I went to work for Tax and Customs Administration in Estonia, and started out in learning and development, ended as head of HR, and I would say that working for the state is really rewarding, and I think one of the most interesting jobs I've ever had, because you really see why are you doing it, and how does this impact the whole of Estonia, all of the people.
Yeah, and I do think that working for the government in Estonia specifically is very special because I think, I mean, it's well known fact that Estonian government is one of those unique ones that really try to provide solutions that will make people's lives easier. Especially when we talk about the tax office, this is not something that's, happening everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. The vision at the time for the tax and customs board was to help businesses do better, and help the businesses grow. So the idea was to make paying taxes and declaring taxes as easy as possible, so people and companies would want to pay taxes. So kind of the internal idea was to have kind of nudged people to be more adhering to the law and to teach people to be adherent to the law. And also our internal kind of regulations went towards it, so that we wanted to have less bureaucracy for our clients, which meant that we had to have less bureaucracy for our employees as well. And from there on, I went to work for an organization called Enterprise Estonia. Again, kind of had a very global reach. Employees in charge of Estonian export growth, located in many different countries, kind of globally, from US to Asia. And the next move in my career was a company that was at a very interesting stage of its life. It was called Perforce Software, and it had just acquired a small Estonian startup called Zero Turnaround. And they were looking for a head of HR who would make this Estonian team slightly bigger, but also who would make it more Perforce, because it was very much it had a very zero turnaround mindset, and it had been through quite a lot of changes. So they needed their identity back, and they needed to be themselves. So I worked with them on culture quite a lot. And it was not just Estonia, but I had different other locations across Scandinavia and Central and Eastern Europe as well. So Finland, Sweden, Czechia, Bulgaria, and for a while Russia and Ukraine as well. And that was, I think, also one of the most kind of thought-provoking and interesting learning opportunity I've ever had.
Yes, and I mean, like, you have a very diverse experience. You worked with so many very different, extremely different industries and different environments. So what would you say were like those kind of changing moments that shaped your approach to HR? Because I'm pretty sure you picked up a lot from every single of those environments.
Yeah, definitely. But I would say that at the end of the day, it's the people that have impacted my understandings and my values and apprehensions. So definitely my direct managers, either heads of HR or the CEOs or even my team members. For example, what is the impact of leaders on culture and on people? I think that leaders are really watched and monitored all day, every day by people. Their every step, their sentences, their eyebrow raise, they are watched and monitored and interpreted. So kind of one of my learnings is that how important and how impactful leaders are, but sometimes they just don't know it, or they're just too busy to recognize it.
Mm-hmm.
Also, how important are my own values? If there are conflicts, or I have to do conflict resolution, for example, or if there is a very difficult ethical case, for example, then it's really important to rely on my own values. So kind of these kinds of learnings, I think, would be something that are most important for me.
Yeah. So, what would you say were the moments that kind of prepared you for managing distributed teams specifically? Like, was there something where you thought, okay, this here I would really need to take a different approach?
I got a little kind of helping start in the university. I was an exchange student in Jyväskylä University 20 years ago, and I took a lot of multicultural topics like multicultural sensitivity and intercultural communication and international HR. And I even did my bachelor thesis on learning in an international company. I guess that gave me a good start, and also the different companies I've worked for that have been either international or really global. So this one, they have really prepared me for this topic.
Yeah. So, what would you say are kind of the opportunities and challenges of distributed teams, and what kind of makes them unique compared to those traditional co-located teams? I mean, I feel like nowadays we're more used to, those international distributed teams, but just wondering what are kind of the opportunities that you see for maybe some companies that are considering the setup?
What makes them unique is definitely there are parts of kind of internal life and culture that makes them unique, and there are parts of business that makes them unique. For example, kind of just starting off, trust is built differently. In traditional teams, trust develops through shared experiences and proximity and familiarity. But in remote teams, because you don't see people, trust is built on responsiveness, reliability, and competence of people, and it really evolves over time. It takes a lot of time for trust to develop. Like obviously, digital presence is very important because there is no physical presence, and so how people behave in Zoom and what is the tone of emails and all of the conversational nuances will become very important. I would say what I have seen is that there will be kind of unacknowledged inequality depending on location. If a team is far away or separated from the leadership team, then I would say this kind of out of sight, out of mind situation kind of might restrict opportunities and might be a challenge. The team might get less credit, might get less opportunities. Promotion might not be given when it is due. And there will be regional subcultures, for example. Ideally, companies have this one big, beautiful culture, but there will be regional subcultures, but that is not necessarily a negative thing. Those local cultures can be really good, really strong, and can be very similar to that one big umbrella culture. But I'm a big proponent of distributed teams because there are so many opportunities. From the broad talent pool, which we all know, the broad span of qualification, ways of thinking, problem solving. And sometimes in different locations, you might get kind of very specialized expertise, very specific talent pool, or some kind of unexpected innovation. And for the business, for example, the follow the sun operations is really good. For example, in customer support, the Asia team, you can have the team throughout Asia, Europe, and US. And when the US team ends their day, Asia team will start. And so you don't have to fuss around with the paper duty and the overtime, and just make sure that all of the customers globally are covered. And this might also reduce the single points of failure risks that companies might have when you spread out the teams throughout different locations.
Any challenges that comes to your head? I always think a lot, obviously, about talent acquisition and retention. So just speaking of retention, wondering if you see any challenges here.
Definitely there are. People might feel lonely if they are separated from their teams. For example, if their team is in another location. Again, if they are far from the leadership team, then people might get this impression, might be right, might be wrong, that they are not involved in decision making, because again, out of sight, out of mind. For an individual, it might be easy to break agreements or be less mindful of things, or don't attain their goals, because distance does make consequences easier to bear and does make negative feedback easier to bear. It's a bit funny, but it's a paradox.
Yeah, I think what I noticed when COVID hit, and first, not only we had distributed teams, but we had teams that were distributed and working fully remotely. Many of our clients have been voicing that it seems like it's easier for people to leave because they're not that connected to the team. So the lack of this personal connection and this feeling of belonging into the team weakened somehow. So because of that, people were more, it was just easy to change jobs because you were working remotely anyways. I think that's something that during that period of time was like very noticeable for us, working with those companies that were very international, but then also at some point had to switch to the remote setup.
Exactly. The low emotional connection with the team and the company makes resignation decision very, very easy. You just don't have to think twice. And you have less contacts with your team, and therefore you have little knowledge what your team does, or might even what other teams do. And it really sometimes creates this kind of us versus them thinking pattern, and can become quite negative. Also, because of those challenges, leadership is very complicated because building trust is difficult. There's little bit visibility. There are cultural and language differences. National culture can affect way of working. Even performance can be affected. So leaders have to really kind of push themselves. And the pressure to talk to people and be in contact with people from far away is really strong. So I would say that leadership in different locations is definitely more complex and more difficult than in traditional setting.
Yeah, so we kind of like naturally getting into what my next question was going to be, and it's about communication and also that being a challenge possibly in distributed teams. So I just wonder, in your opinion, how can leaders effectively manage communication across different time zones, and then also at the same time ensure everyone kind of stays aligned and on the same page?
There are definitely like those easy, techniques and rules. Put together clear communication norms. What kind of meetings will we have? What kind of cadence from individual to team to company-wide meetings? What kinds of tools we use? What kind of channels we use? Even what are the response times for everyday communication? What I have learned is that knowledge management is very important. Have that single source of information, some kind of a platform. For example, Confluence or Notion is really good, where you document everything. You need that single source of information if people are not available due to time zones. Record meetings, document decisions, goal and KPI boards, really good. Have people do different kinds of written updates, and also create space, some kind of space or a channel, Slack channel for informal communication as well. So that's a good way to build relationships and kind of become slightly visible. And also, I would say that what helps with communication is local autonomy. Local teams need autonomy, and local leaders need autonomy to make their own decisions.
Yeah. And you mentioned already before that the way how companies build trust is very different when we're speaking about distributed teams. So I just wonder what are some steps that leaders can take to establish trust across distance? Because of course it is more challenging where we don't see each other at the office every day and we don't have this personal connection. Sometimes they never meet in person.
Trust is the basis of all relationships, really. And John Maxwell's idea that leadership is actually influencing people or gaining influence over people without being autocratic. And how do you gain influence? You gain it through trust. First of all, open and honest information sharing. Share everything about the company that you can, direction, decisions, vision, changes, and always explain the reasons behind the most significant decisions, and ideally connect them to values, strategy, business needs, and things like that. Leaders definitely need to share their personal vision and intent for the team and the function as well. This will get people aligned to the vision, short-term plans, and it's much easier to follow them if they know where they need to go. And if you're lucky, then people will be proactive, meet or outpace expectations, and they just know where to go. And something, again, what I have seen and learned is that leadership needs to be predictable, and leaders need to be predictable in their behavior, not just acting consistently and be reliable, but be predictable. And if you base your decisions, business decisions, on business needs and strategy and values, then you are predictable. And if you explain them, then you are predictable. And it's easy to trust a person who is predictable and who has a certain pattern and who follows through on promises. And if they promise something and they get it done, then people trust you. What I've also seen and learned is that leading people is actually about satisfying their individual needs. So leaders definitely need to take time to get to know their people, to listen to their needs, understand their individual needs. What are their personal challenges, work-wise or personal issues, professional goals, what are they striving towards, any family needs, and then provide support accordingly. Be flexible, be understanding, assist, give guidance, and help them with their career steps, for example. So this is something that helps with trust.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think another thing that always comes to my mind when it comes to managing distributed teams is also kind of managing the performance, setting goals, and leading the team in a way where they feel inspired and productive and motivated without feeling that they're being micromanaged, which I feel like it's very thin line here, because we do use all those. Even in our team, we use a lot of project management tools, and we set our weekly goals, and we try to be transparent with the team. But I think it might come across a little bit challenging to do it in a very efficient way without the team members to feel like, the leaders always keep an eye on every step of what they do, and they might feel micromanaged at times. So what would you say are things that, how would you say leaders can manage it in the right way?
The clarity of goals and vision and tasks is a very good start. Definitely have to have, the question that the employees usually ask is, tell me where we are going. And that should be very clear. And goal agreements, this is definitely the first step. And definitely people do need feedback, not just praise or recognition, but true feedback.
Yeah.
What I like about goals, I really emphasize goals. What I like about goals is that they are just not about kind of helping that company get where it wants to be, but it also builds self-mastery. And it helps people learn different techniques, how to get what they want. And it's a learning process. Attaining goals is a learning process. And we develop resilience, resourcefulness, and techniques how to excel at work. Also, the emphasis should be on self-management. And as people kind of follow through on their goals and tasks, they also need to learn that managing up is important as well, how they assess themselves, because self-assessment, the self-management and self-reporting on those goals and tasks is important as well. And it's not just the leader's tasks to find out how the employee is doing, but the employee themselves need to learn and active so that they will talk about how they are doing or report how they are doing. So it's not just one way street. It's definitely a two-way process.
Yes, what I found like also helpful for us is that we encourage the team to set their own goals, and because we kind of want them to feel like, okay, this is what we want to achieve, and we can just be there to support and like help with the direction, instead of telling you this is what you have to do, and these are the deadlines, and this is what we want to achieve. So I think maybe in this setup, it can also be just one of those tiny little tweaks that companies can do.
Definitely. And most of the time, I think that it's the employees who have the better view of the function, because they know the details and the manager doesn't necessarily know the details. But the employee is the one who always knows more about their own work and the specific function they do.
Yeah. So kind of to build on that, how would you say leaders can encourage autonomy while maintaining accountability and alignment with the organizational goals? Because sometimes how I feel working, especially with large organizations, there might be bigger goals on the corporate level, and then it needs to be transferred into those smaller teams while keeping up with all the things that we have just discussed. So wondering what are your ideas? How can we make it easier for the leadership teams to keep the team accountable, but also aligned with the bigger picture?
I think what we have already talked about, goals are important so that they know where they are going, and But when it comes to workplace autonomy, then let's look at what workplace autonomy is. So it's not the same as individual rights. You can't do anything you want. But workplace autonomy exists within certain limitations like company vision, business strategy, business model, processes, workflows, internal rules and regulations. Therefore, people need to understand them. They need to read them, they need to be taught, and they need to navigate within those borders that all of those documents and processes and guidelines give them. And when you have those guidelines, it's easier to make decisions and it's easier to take accountability of their own work. And just leaders need to communicate the vision so that people know where to go and know what the guidelines are. And of course, they need to have the freedom to make decisions as well, so the right to make the decisions. And I would say that when I define accountability, then accountability also means developing your own work and do the research and do the development work behind that, and also be consistent and take responsibility if something goes wrong and then fix it. So this is something that leaders can give feedback and encourage all of the time. So those kind of little things.
Yeah, sounds great. And so now maybe we can move to some cultural topics related to that. So obviously working with international teams brings cultural differences into play. And I was wondering, what are the most common cultural challenges you have faced over the years working with distributed teams, and how do you address things like that on a daily basis?
Communication styles, for example, direct cultures, indirect cultures. First, either you adapt communication to culture or you have very clear agreements. How do we communicate in this company? And I would say it's difficult to adapt to each culture because, again, leaders are not that pliable. They cannot do everything. If they are from a direct culture, then it's really difficult to form themselves into something, for example, into messaging that UK employees expect, because their messaging is sometimes very layered and nuanced. So it's better to have some kind of agreements how we communicate. Decision making, definitely something I have seen. Certain cultures have very top-down decision making. Certain cultures have consensus-based decision making. First one is, for example, India, consensus-based decision making. Scandinavia, Estonian decision making is usually decision is made where the expertise is. Definitely as low as you can go in the company structure. And again, this needs agreements. How do we make decisions? Who has the right to make what kind of decisions? How expensive decisions? What I've also seen is that if you don't have such agreements, then it will slow the company down. And all of the processes and operations will become very slow because people are just waiting for decisions and information. Lots of other examples, how trust is built, performance versus personal relationships, attitude towards authority, formal titles, risk-taking, for example. So yeah, quite a lot of differences, but what I want to emphasize is that individual behavior is influenced by so many other things. In addition to culture, culture does not dictate every behavior and every decision. So getting to know people individually is important as well. And just avoid stereotyping, because it's very easy. These kind of like cultural sensitivity theories and examples make it very easy to stereotype people. but culture, national culture is not everything.
100% I agree. On the other hand, what I noticed over the years was that the way I give feedback might differ slightly depending on where I'm at the moment. So I feel like working in the US, I could be way more direct, and people maybe didn't take it. Maybe they just took it as constructive feedback, not necessarily taking it personally. Some other cultures, I felt like maybe a more subtle approach is better. So I just wonder, like, from your experience, obviously you work with so many different cultures. Do you ever take that into consideration? I mean, the cultural differences when giving feedback to teams?
Yes, I do. And I've had a really interesting experience with an Indian manager giving feedback to a Bangladeshi employee. And I was involved in kind of strategizing how to give that feedback. And I think we spent an hour on how to give that feedback. And it was a mix of direct feedback and kind of this subtle praise, I would say. And that Indian manager was actually a very direct person. So he did a very good job of giving very direct feedback, wrote it down very well. But we kind of still try to mix it with kind of a softer approach. And even working on it for an hour and really thinking about it, how that person from Bangladesh would react, then I still was not ready for that reaction because he was really shocked, and for an interesting reason, because that was the first time he ever got written feedback. So he got the same feedback verbally and also in writing. And I was just not prepared for that reaction and that experience because I thought that, okay, he must have had several years of experience. He must have had written feedback at some point in his life. And he was shocked about the written feedback. So I kind of investigated and questioned him further so that I could learn something. Yeah, that was kind of my outtake, that even these little aspects might become something that impact people's behavior and their thinking and their reaction. So yes, you need to be ready for everything, but you can't cover everything.
Yeah, of course. And also, as HR leaders, kind of managing different cultures, you also keep learning every day. I don't think that we are prepared for all those conversations. I think it's important to take that into consideration while preparing for feedback meetings or while preparing written feedback like that. But I guess, we always keep learning, and you can never be 100% prepared for for the reaction or how the feedback is taken. So I think it's important to do the due diligence and try to convey the message in the most effective way, but you never know what the outcome is going to be fully. So in general, like, what would you say what role does leadership play in company culture? More of a generic question, but just wondering what your thoughts on that are.
Definitely, it's something that impacts culture the most, and it shapes the culture. It shapes the apprehensions people have. It shapes how people behave, how we communicate with each other, and I would say definitely leaders are kind of in the driving position when it comes to shaping culture, because they model the attitudes and the practices that define culture, and their behavior employees see how to talk to each other, how to interact, how to collaborate, how to approach their work, and if and how they attain their goals. Even that is impacted. And leadership also impacts how people understand culture. Again, from my experience, one of the companies I worked for, people understood culture as events and possibilities to be together. Although it's not just events. And but because the CEO understood culture as events, then all of the people thought that culture is events. So leaders either reinforce these values through daily actions and decision making and communication. This will sound really negative, or just demonstrate pure hypocrisy. Just destroys trust and weakens culture. For example, saying one thing, doing another. Again, just one example from my experience. A leader emphasized that it's important to start meetings on time, but he himself was late for most of the meetings. Very, very small but very silly example, but a good...
But it kind of shows, like what you said, that, if you don't play the game by your own rules, it's very hard to then follow and take the culture and the values and the mission. It all kind of goes together to take all those things seriously if you don't see it in those daily actions of people who should, be the role models when it comes to that. So just wondering, how can it have a positive feedback, a positive outcome on teams that they're so diverse? I think that's kind of like the easier way to say it. If there are any positive things that can come out of the team that's as diverse as they get.
Yeah, definitely. I think what I mentioned in the beginning, and the richness of talents, richness of ideas, different experiences, because, for example, if one location hasn't had the experience, maybe another location has had it.
Exactly. Kind of learning from each other.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And I do like the idea of the kind of the time zone based operations where you have distributed teams along different time zones and supporting, for example, customers on different locations. Also, different locations might have very specific expertise, and when the location is small, for example, Estonia, then you might not have, for example, certain technical or software expertise, but you might find it somewhere else in another country and in another location, or if you have somebody who is ready to learn it in Estonia, if you're just looking for something like really, really specific, and if you have somebody, for example, in Estonia ready to learn it, then great, why not teach it, even if you have, I don't know, a team ready somewhere else. So you have so many possibilities, and you just, I think, need to take your time, and you need to analyze what is best.
Yes. Yeah, I think like there are so many things like that even come to on top of my head, but we could probably spend whole day talking about it.
And something what I've seen is that different locations can support different types of businesses, for example, and there are some. I think in Estonia there are some well-known stereotypes that we are good at software engineering, but we are not good at sales, for example. But usually the engineering team is in in Estonia, and sales team is in US or in UK. So.
Yes, that's true. I heard many of our own clients saying, "Oh, we would rather, have the sales team elsewhere." Even though I don't fully agree, we have hired some amazing salespeople in Estonia as well over the years. But I guess it's just again like a little bit generalizing in those fields. So. maybe if we could talk a little bit about scaling the distributed teams. I was wondering how can organizations kind of maintain a strong company culture while scaling teams globally? Because we talked a little bit more about the local cultures and the autonomy that's important there, but wondering what are your thoughts on scaling distributed teams?
Culture needs to evolve constantly. So when you're scaling your teams, then you need to grow your culture as well. And you need to do it very consciously. You need to know where you're going and you need to know how to get there. And you need to involve people because people are the agents of change. And I think in every organization I've been, I hear people saying that our culture has changed. It doesn't have the same vibe anymore. And people usually don't like cultural change, but they don't realize that it's the people who change. And if you want a good culture and if you want your business to grow, you need to change the culture consciously. And something that is very important, what I've learned, and I have a good sales example. So I'm picking up what you talked about hiring sales in Estonia. If you want to grow and you're hiring new people, don't hire for cultural fit or don't hire for the goals you have right now, but hire for growth and hire for cultural growth, hire for business growth and cultural growth, and hire those people who will develop your culture the next month and the next year, not just right now. And the sales example, for example, if your business is business to customer, but you want to change your business to business operations, then you need to change your culture as well, and you need to hire people who come from business to business sales culture and who know enterprise sales, for example, and who maybe have that aggressive sales behavior and who act maybe differently than people in your organization act right now. So you need to look into the future and you need to be ready to change your culture all of the time. And you have to do it consciously.
Yeah, I kind of adjust because I think obviously the people create the culture. So if the direction of the business is changing and all those things that you mentioned, I think it's clear to be flexible. But like you mentioned, I think it's a challenge for leaders, HR professionals to do that in a way maybe not upset, but to keep the team still happy. Like in my experience over the years, like every company that went through some sort of acquisition, merger, and the culture changed because of that, there was always like a big turnover connected to the fact that the culture is changing, because many people just don't like change. So I think it's very interesting to see some success stories and how some companies handled it in the right way to make sure that people stayed and actually engaged with the new model.
I have a very good example. When I joined before software, then it was the exact situation that people from Zero Turnaround that they had acquired. They said that, I don't know who we are, it's not the same vibe anymore. And but they had a very good attitude. They said that let's throw out everything Zero Turnaround and let's be perforce. So we did a lot of workshops on it. We defined who we wanted to be and where did we want to go. We talked about that we want to be fun and quirky, but our products need a good quality and we want to be proud of our work. And we had lots of agreements about leadership and about no sarcasm, for example, and things like that, so that we could be really proud of ourselves. We had after I joined, the first 6 months, we did have a very big turnover, but then it slowed down. And I think afterwards we just had maybe 2 or 3 people leaving per year. And I think that cultural turnaround was really worked
For
really
the better.
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds great. So maybe one more question before we start wrapping up. What do you think now with the context of hybrid and remote work trends, let's put it this way? What do you think is the future of distributed teams when it comes to hybrid and remote work?
Hybrid is here to stay, and I think the trend of distributed teams will continue to expand because remote working has normalized it, has normalized hiring talents everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
And what I see is that asynchronous communication will be honed, polished, detailed with tools, rules, workflows, and companies are really working on their communication. And it's interesting to see how these new tools, virtual HQs, will start working, like Teamflow. And I think Meta has Horizon workrooms that enable collaboration and chats and presentations. So it will be interesting to see if they will become very popular. Then definitely smart and safe working will be kind of more prevalent. AI, automation, mental well-being, flexible hours, and definitely what I mentioned in the beginning, the pressure on leaders and leadership quality is increasing all the time. So hybrid will make it even more prevalent because leadership is complex, and in distributed teams it's even more complex because you need to handle ambiguity and uncertainty and navigate all of those cultural needs and personal needs. And I do expect at some point people saying that, no, I don't want to be a leader. It's much better to be an individual contributor because I just want to concentrate on my own needs, for example.
Yes, 100%. And I see it more and more every year, especially in tech. That, maybe 5-6 years ago, like this tendency of people wanting to progress into leadership roles was way more significant than it is now, whilst people kind of prefer to grow in their area and become an expert. Just something that I saw already, like a little transition. So it's interesting that you also kind of picked up on that might be a trend moving forward. So if you could give one piece of advice to HR professionals or leaders new to managing distributed teams, what would it be?
Definitely clarity and agreements on how we work, collaborate, and communicate with each other. Train your leaders and be ready for ambiguity, conflicts, problems, all kinds of issues. If you're ready, if you anticipate them, then it will be easier to bear and manage. And I would not say it's a necessity, but you will have them. It's inevitable, and it's not necessarily negative. And have a strong company culture, but don't be afraid to have a strong regional culture as well. Because that could be a strength for the whole company.
Yes, I love that. Well, I think that's a good time to wrap up the conversation. Thank you so much for sharing all the insights. I took a lot out of it, and I'm sure other listeners will as well. Thank you so much for your time. yes, and hopefully we can keep in touch and continue the conversation online.
So thank you very much for having me. It was very interesting to talk about leadership, culture, and distributed teams. And all the best for Magic Mondays.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining me on Culture Pulse, the heartbeat of your workplace. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and found some insights to take back to your team. Don't forget to subscribe for more discussions, and for all the latest updates on the podcast, follow Magic Mondays Miami on LinkedIn. See you next time!